Anneliese, ach Anneliese, warum ben je zo kwaad?
Hello, this is OnePingOnly, and welcome to another Combat Mission After Action Report video. It's a chilly fall day somewhere near the Dutch, Belgian, and German borders along the approach to Aachen. This village is going to be the scene of a meeting engagement between myself as the Germans attempting to deprive the Allies of an easy advance on Aachen, and Paleolithic Monk from The Few Good Men, who will be playing the advancing Americans. This will be my first multiplayer battle against someone from thefewgoodmen.com, which is a great site to discuss combat mission, find opponents, and participate in tournaments. I'm glad I joined up and got involved, and that's coming from someone who is a prototypical internet lurker. The map for this battle is typical for a meeting engagement, being nearly symmetrical in layout. Monk and I will be starting in opposite corners, and we will both have objectives close to our starting locations. The main prize is the village in the center. There are important terrain differences between our two sides, however. First, while I have more high ground on my side of the map, that's not necessarily the tactical advantage that some would say that it is. To get to the village, I have to come down a relatively open forward slope. If I don't do that before Monk gets into advantageous firing positions, I'm going to have a big problem. Second, Monk has access to a bit more cover and covered approaches to the village than I do. On his left, Monk can use the woods to mask his approach to the village, and can use the woods as a base of fire into the village. I can counter this by placing forces along this line of hedges with good views to the open field that Monk will have to cross to get to the village. On his center right, he can approach through a grove of trees and be right on the cemetery that forms the western end of the town objective. I consider an envelopment of the village from the right flank, but here I would have to worry about flanking fire from the woods, or I would have to slog through the woods, which is time consuming. The same problems exist on the left flank as well. Since the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line and time is of the essence, I elect to go straight up the middle. Using motorized forces that can get to the village quickly, I can then force Monk to try and take it from me. For this scenario, I've purchased a Panzer Grenadier company with 1 platoon in half-tracks, 1 platoon in trucks, and 1 understrength platoon on foot. I also have a weapons platoon with 2 81mm mortars and a mortar carrier half-track. The half-track is there for the extra ammunition capacity. The weapons platoon also has a half-track armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun for support work. And lastly, I purchased 1 Panther and 1 Panzer IV for my armor. My plan is aggressive and simple, and makes no attempt to capture the objective on Monk's side of the map. This is all about the center objective. First, I'll lay down a smoke screen on Monk's hill to blind him, and on the forward slope as I push my troops down the hill. My infantry in half-tracks and trucks will race forward into the town and set up positions to defend against Monk's subsequent assault. My tanks will go out far on either flank, where they can interdict Monk's forces coming into town and provide fire support. With deployment complete, it's time to hit the go button. As my motorized troops rush forward, I begin to lay down the smoke screen. My Panzer IV quickly gets out to my right flank and establishes a position overlooking the field to the north of the village. It's joined by an infantry team to cover the wood line. Likewise, my Panther, carrying infantry as its security detail, does the same on the left flank. The dash to the town, however, does not get off to an auspicious start. The lead truck falls victim to a mortar round. It's actually a smoke barrage, but that's still unfriendly to flammable trucks. It does give cover to the men climbing out of the trucks, and the trucks that are backed up behind them, but it does take an entire infantry squad and heavy machine gun team out for the first half of the game. As Monk no doubt intended, however, my troops on top of the hill have no visibility to what he's doing on his side of the map. That works both ways, though, and so I begin my cavalry charge. Miraculously, everyone arrives safely and begins to disperse into the buildings. The buildings of the town are sturdy, so if I can get my troops into them, hopefully Monk will have a hard time rooting me out. My Panther on the hill and my troops in the village confirm that the Americans are on the way. This includes a fleeting glimpse of a Sherman. Having rerouted my truck-borne infantry away from Monk's artillery barrage, they begin their charge into the village. Wait. You guys are supposed to go on into the town. Don't stop. No. Definitely do not back up. But of course, by this point, Monk's forces are in firing position, and they make me pay. One truck and its squad makes it to its destination. But between the mortar attack on my hill and the fire from the Sherman, I've lost 2 of my squads and a heavy machine gun team intended for the village. I have 5 squads and 4 half-tracks to blunt Monk's assault, which is starting. As expected, infantry is advancing towards the churchyard. Although theoretically my troops have a good field of vision from the tops of these buildings, they are unable to prevent the Americans from establishing a foothold in the church. It's unclear how the Americans are doing, but I'm suffering casualties at a concerning rate. Other house strongpoints join the fight, but they are also unable to achieve fire superiority. The Americans fire back with automatic weapons and direct fire mortars. On my right flank, I use my Panzer IV to shell Monk's Hill, targeting potential positions for mortars and their spotters. The Americans respond with small arms fire from a hidden location, and mortar fire quickly targets my position. My infantry spots American infantry moving through the forest to the north of town. I use the Panzer IV to pin them down. relocate my Panzer IV to dodge the mortar fire coming into my line, while my infantry stays put to keep eyes on the situation. For the moment, this appears to have stopped the Americans. The cost is high, however, as Monk has zeroed in his artillery on my revealed infantry positions. On my left flank, it's a similar story. Once spotted, Monk directs accurate mortar fire onto my units. This necessitates relocation, which keeps the Panther out of the action for a few crucial minutes. More mortars and tank shells fall in the village. While worrying about the mortars and the Sherman tank up on the ridge, it's hard for my half-tracks to get an angle to support the battle at the churchyard. They are not as effective as Monk's mortars, and my men get pinned, and the first squad is wiped out. There's also some Sherman-initiated demolition. I move my half-tracks up to try to give better support. But I quickly start losing half-track gunners. But it does seem to be keeping the Americans' heads down. I bring another squad into the front row of buildings to try and achieve fire superiority. But between Americans in the church, shells from the Sherman, and 50 cal from the half-tracks, my frontline troops quickly find themselves pinned. Out on my right flank, my Panzer IV continues to shoot and scoot. With Americans spotted in the woods again, the Panzer IV does its job of keeping them at bay. This comes at a cost, however, because each time my forces shoot, Monk directs artillery fire onto their positions. It's really time to do something about that Sherman and the half-track on top of the hill. Hoping I can win a long-range duel, I move my Panther up into a hull-down position. Both tanks spot each other. Panther shoots first and hits a tree. The Panther shrugs off the return fire. And this engagement is won. Believing that there's one more US tank out there, the Panther relocates to an alternate position. Now I start getting contacts on my far left flank. It's infantry moving through these woods. My Panther provides area fire. This doesn't keep them down long, however. Somehow they're able to spot my OP and engage.
Stellung! Haltet diese Stellung!
It turns out, however, this is a distraction. The main attack comes from the right. The survivors of the OP flee, leaving only the Panther to guard this flank. An American half-track appears on the left flank, closer to the village. My half-tracks don't spot it, as they try to reposition within the village. This knocks out the 20mm cannon, rendering it useless. The M3 moves up towards the village. It backs off, and there's a little bit of revenge for my half-tracks. Meanwhile, the village is being pounded by what has to be Monk's preparatory artillery bombardment. An attack is coming, and the artillery is forcing away my half-tracks, which are key to my defense. Smoke rounds begin to fall in the village. It engulfs the village rapidly. The attack emerges from the smoke screen. My first line of defense is quickly wiped out. The Americans enter the first block of buildings. The close quarters street fighting is brutal. The first block of the village is lost, but now the full firepower of my half-tracks can be brought to bear, if they live long enough. There's plenty of danger between bazookas and upper-story snipers. They are still unable to achieve fire superiority, however. The gunners are just too vulnerable. Still, I've blunted the first wave. I've lost 2 squads, but the Americans have suffered as well. However, the impact of the slain half-track gunners remains to be seen. One of Monk's half-tracks hammers away at my command post with 50 cal. It's hard to call in mortar fire when you're curled up in the wall. At this point, I haven't seen any more American armor, so I move my Panzer IV up. It engages the half-track. A miss! And one that deserves slow motion replay. The half-track winds up, defiantly bogged, but out of view of my Sherman. Back in the town, I'm down to my second line of defense in the form of 2 squads, plus assorted half-tracks. Some of these I have to get back into the fight, as they are either panicked or have dead gunners. A brave rifleman runs out in an attempt to recrew a half-track. He doesn't make it. Unfortunately, the Americans are calling up reinforcements, whereas I have none that I can easily bring up. As more smoke settles over the city, and more artillery rains down, the Americans use the cover to reoccupy the first block of buildings. This face-off is indecisive, with both sides inflicting casualties. On the north side of the village, the Americans open a new avenue of attack under cover of smoke. This time, they've infiltrated a building with a good field of fire down into the eastern end of town. Again, I have to rely on the half-tracks to counter this move. They are effective, but return fire forces them to back off. And another of the critical gunners is killed. In a panic, the half-track backs off. By this point, I no longer believe that any other American armor is present, so I start bringing my Panther down closer to the village where it can function in a direct fire role. This also gets it out of a near constant mortar barrage. But the American strong point remains occupied. My Stroke 10 half-track joins in as well. But accurate and quick reacting mortar fire causes my half-tracks and all my units to have to shoot and scoot. The mortars are a huge problem. It's not until about halfway through the game that I get a good spot on some of the mortars' location. Despite tasking several assets to attack the enemy's base of fire, I'm unable to get any clear, obvious hits and kills. Trees intervene and block many of my shots. As a result, the mortars just keep falling. This one on my base of fire. Mortars take out my battalion commander, which greatly restricts my ability to call in mortar fire of my own. Back in the town, an attempt to turn my flank from the north is repulsed, but the fire from the large 3-story building in the middle of town is deadly. It's a whole American squad versus one fire team. At those odds, it's not a strong point that I can either take back or suppress. Again, my shooting and scooting armor has to intervene. Still, the occupants seem unfazed. It's time for a bit of exterior redecorating. On my right flank, my Panzer IV has been pretty successful in keeping the American infantry from crossing the field. Now that the Panzer IV has moved down close to the village, however, Monk sees an opening and sends his forces across the field. I can't allow the objective on my hill to be contested, so I have to move up some of my reserves. That includes a team of my surviving truck-mounted infantry, who have just now recovered from their ordeal and are ready to fight. I relocate my Stroke 10 half-track to the top of my objective hill. Although I do pull my infantry back from the front line, they still suffer under yet another mortar bombardment. But the survivors collect themselves and deal with the first wave of attackers. And the second wave. And finally, my mortars do something useful in the battle Between their area fire and the actions of my infantry, the line holds. The Americans are forced to withdraw, this time for good. At this point, there's about 10 minutes left in the battle. With the clock running down, I start pushing more units toward the village, including my Panzer IV. It's a risk to bring it in that close, but I'm balancing the need to have enough forces in to control or contest the objective, with the risk of losing a high-value unit. After all, bazookas are still out there. Unfortunately for the village, the approach is to flatten any building where I've had a sound contact. The Panzer IV presses as far as it dares until it runs out of high explosive shells. My infantry is still pinned down by Americans in the town, but the Panther is there to dislodge them. On my left flank, the Americans finally attempt to exploit the break in my lines that they made earlier. Their attempt to enter the town via a new direction is noticed by the Panther. This flank remains quiet for the rest of the battle. Back at the main objective, my remaining half-tracks and a reserve infantry unit move forward to try and push the Americans out of the village. The squad assembles under covering fire and begins its assault. But just when I think the Americans are all dead, they keep popping up. My morale state is low, so a single casualty causes the entire attack to falter. The survivors regroup out of the line of fire. Check out this cool customer, having a smoke in the middle of a mortar barrage. He must be an Eckstein man. Smoking kills. There will be no more infantry counterattacks today. It's up to the tanks. Monk tries to push some additional infantry into the objective zone. This wave only makes it to the edge of the churchyard, but others manage to slip inside. I push my Panther dangerously forward into town. It's a risk I feel like I have to take to assert claim to the objective. It survives 2 bazooka near misses and exacts quick revenge. And with that, the game ends in a draw. Both of us held the objectives on our respective sides of the map, but neither of us clearly dominated the village in the center. I lost 69 men and 3 trucks, while Monk lost 117 men and his Sherman tank. The slight points and casualty differential was not enough to declare a winner. This was quite the slugfest. By the end, Monk and I were like 2 boxers who had gone a bunch of rounds and had very little fight left and were just hanging on each other. So, a few thoughts about the battle. First, Monk used his mortars splendidly. When I would reveal my position by firing, within 1 to 2 turns, a bunch of mortars would be dropping on that position. That's to say nothing of the general bombardments. Mortars were constant and very effective. I also think he did a good job with the infantry assaults, effectively using mass. This allowed him to overwhelm small teams of infantry in individual houses. Lastly, his attacks on my flanks kept me from moving tanks and infantry from those flanks into town, effectively tying them up. For my part, I think I was too conservative with my armor. After destroying what turned out to be Monk's sole Sherman, I persisted too long in the belief that he had more armor. As a result, I waited too long before committing my tanks to the battle in the village. Used earlier, they could have prevented Monk from taking over half of the village block. I was concerned about bazooka teams and overall losing one of my precious tanks. And true, loss of a tank might have swung the score in Monk's favor, but overall it's a case of me playing not to lose instead of playing to win. When you do that, you rarely win. So, I hope that you enjoyed this after-action report video. This was a fun battle, despite the inconclusive outcome, and hats off to Paleolithic Monk for playing it with me. I learned a great deal. I'd also like to apologize to the Flemish villagers. We'll stop by later to help clean up the mess. As always, feel free to leave constructive feedback in the comments section. So until next time, this is OnePingOnly, and thank you for watching.
Ach, Anneliese, gebruik nu toch eens je